Yorokobe Shonen, how are you all doing this fine day? In today's video we are going to be looking at whether or not the 5 Death Row Convicts from Baki would be able to survive in the world of Dragon Ball, and most importantly how far they would be able to get there. But first things first, let's do a small short summary of what Baki is all about for the ones who may not know anything about the context of the show, and if you already know all about Baki, feel free to skip to the timestamp shown on screen right now to just continue with the video. The Baki franchise is a martial arts anime centered around the protagonist Baki Hanma, a young fighter striving to surpass his father Yujiro Hanma, also known as the Ogre or the strongest creature on Earth. The main premise of the show is Baki's journey to become the strongest fighter through various underground tournaments and personal challenges in order to dethrone his father as the strongest creature on Earth. Currently, as of now, the franchise has 4 anime installments and its original source manga. The current anime arcs are Baki the Grappler, which introduces Baki's quest and his beginnings as a fighter and just basically starts everything off. You also have the Most Evil Death Row Convicts arc, in which Baki battles escaped Death Row inmates with pretty bizarre fighting styles and immense strength, which also happens to be the main focus of today's video. Then you have the Great Right Eye Tournament arc, where the focus lies on a worldwide martial arts event where Baki competes against international fighters, and finally you have Baki Son of Ogre, which focuses on Baki's ultimate fight with his father Yujiro. In general, Baki is celebrated for its portrayal of martial arts, character development and the exploration of what it means to be the strongest. It's a show that reminds me of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure quite a lot due to its absolutely wacky fights and characters, so if you do like JoJo, be sure to give Baki a try too. I am like 99% sure you won't be disappointed. But before we get into the characters of the day, it's time for everybody's favorite segment, the spoiler warning. You know, as per usual with these types of videos, I do feel the personal responsibility to throw in a little spoiler warning. Nothing is more annoying than suddenly getting spoiled on major abilities and major plot points of an anime you want to watch. So please do be aware that I will be talking about abilities and plot points that might currently only be available to those who read the original source materials or just haven't seen the anime yet. If you do want to watch the show or read the manga or whatever first before continuing this video, I totally understand, by all means do so. Baki is very fun to read and very fun to watch, so you know, I kind of want you to experience the show for yourself anyway, so you know, win-win for me. But with that little warning out of the way, let's talk some more about the Death Row inmates. In the Most Evil Death Row Convicts arc of the Baki anime, 5 notorious Death Row inmates escape from prisons around the world and converge in Tokyo, drawn there by the desire to fight and experience the defeat they long for. Our team of 5 convicts consists of Spec, an American serial killer who is based on the actual real-life serial killers Andre Chikatilo and Richard Spec. Then you have Hector Doyle, a British, potentially Scottish assassin. His name is potentially derived from the old tale of Jekyll and Hyde, referencing his like outward innocence and inward personality, but that's pretty much just what I gather from it. Like, it's not documented anywhere, that's my opinion, right? Every time I see Doyle, I just can't help but think of Jekyll and Hyde. But next up you have Dorian, an American practitioner of 4,000-year-old Chinese martial arts and the first Westerner to achieve the title of Sea King, a very prestigious and sought-after title among fellow Kempo practitioners. Next up we have Sikorski, a Russian convict fit for his athletic prowess who relies on his own strength rather than actual like martial arts techniques. And finally we have Ryuko Yanagi, the only Japanese convict and a student of Kunimatsu who taught him the way of avoid fighting. Their sudden arrival in Tokyo disrupts the underground fighting scene, leading to the intense battles where those convicts face off against Baki and the other prominent fighters in the franchise. So let's take a look at what types of skills these fighters bring to the scene. Let's begin with who I deem as the weakest of the convicts, the Russian Sikorski. So I call Sikorski the weakest of the 5 for 2 main reasons. He is simply weaker than several of the other inmates on a physical front, and he does not really have a useful signature move if you compare it to the other 4. Sikorski is described as an incredibly athletic man who would have won countless gold medals for Russia if he had not gravitated towards crime. He would be the greatest athlete to have ever lived if he spawned on Earth right now, but sadly for him, he lives in the Baki universe. Sikorski's powers are that he can pretty much scale anything as long as it has some shit like rust on it for him to somehow grab onto. His finger strength is probably the greatest in the entire Bakiverse. Don't quote me on that because I'm sure there's maybe somebody stronger, but you know, it's his entire gimmick. And aside from climbing with his finger strength, he can also use this power to slice through flesh with ease. And those abilities would surely classify him as superhuman in our world, but again, in the context of Baki, he is really not that special. Therefore, I have have him placed as the weakest of the 5, but do keep in mind that that's just my opinion. It does not mean that he is a random pushover. Just keep that in the back of your mind if you would. So next up, we have the second weakest among the Death Row Convicts, again my opinion, in Hector Doyle. Hector is pretty unique among the convicts because he is the only one out of the 5 of them who is not really somebody who calls himself a warrior or a fighter. Doyle is an assassin through and through. Unlike many others, he does not give a rat's ass about how he wins, as long as he wins in the end. Doyle fights using multiple concealed weapons embedded in his body, which he controls using mechanical switches in his hand. He uses knives, guns, poisons, bombs, and whatever he can get his hands on. Talking purely physical, he is by far the weakest of the inmates, but his methodical way of fighting puts him above Sikorski in my book. Doyle is a pretty refreshing fighter who stands out among the typical Baki fighters by just taping a claymore to his chest and going to town. Honestly speaking, we could use more Doyles in Baki to just kind of like spice things up, right? We have a lot less weapon experts or like assassin type characters than we have just regular brawlers. But then again, it is called like Baki the Grappler, right? It's not Baki the Assassin, for a reason. But next up we have Yanagi, who firmly claims the 3rd ranking in my opinion. Yanagi is a weapons expert who is also supremely trained in martial arts. He can use pretty much any weapon on an expert level, which already makes him pretty dangerous in a fight. But his true power comes from his experience in the void fighting style, which he learned from Kunimatsu. This style enabled him to use a vacuum created by the palm of his hands for various results. Some of these methods included the use of a poison that was so painful that those untrained, unlike Yanagi, would usually cut off their own hands due to the immensely painful nature of preparing for this technique. And the other one is the whip strike, a very painful technique that strips the flesh of his victims with each strike. Basically flagging them or flinging them. I don't know, there's a word for that, but I probably butchered it, but I hope you get what I mean, right? But Yanagi is a very dangerous foe precisely because he is an expert martial artist. His actions are thought through and you won't easily catch him off guard. But we have finally arrived at the top 2 prisoners who in my opinion pretty much share the number 1 spot. It really depends on what you value more if you want to place them on 1 or 2. But in my case, first off we have Dorian, a legendary American fighter who mastered Chinese Kenpo, also called 4,000-year-old Chinese martial arts, but he does not solely rely on his experience as a martial artist to win. He actually uses multiple methods or means to win fights. He will cut off people's limbs with a special lighter which has a piano wire attached to it. He will hide grenades and Molotov cocktails in his stomach while he throws up to use it on his foes. And he even went as far as to implant a small bomb inside of his hands to literally give someone the most explosive bitch slap possible. Dorian cares about winning, and if he can't win using traditional methods, he will get down and dirty without any issues. In that sense, he is kind of like Doyle, but he does have a bit more pride in his, I suppose, his Kenpo, right? But Dorian is definitely stronger than Sikorski, just as crafty as Doyle, and an expert martial artist just like Yanagi. But there is one prisoner who I personally feel still has the tiniest edge over Dorian, and that would be none other than Spec. So, Spec, right? Let's just say that Spec is an entirely different beast of a man. He is the epitome of no fucks given at any point in time. Like, he is quite literally a 93-year-old man too stubborn to age and die. They had to keep my man in a submarine 200 meters below the ocean and he still escaped. How, you ask? Oh, he just swam out. Yeah, he just swam the entire 200 meters to the surface and just proceeded to beat the shit out of everybody he met there. Now, Spec's 2 main traits are that he is insanely strong in terms of raw strength and he can hold his breath for up to 5 minutes. In terms of raw power, he has every other prisoner beat, but don't underestimate those 5 minutes of holding his breath either. Utilizing this talent, he can launch an assault of attacks for 5 whole minutes without any type of break. He will literally not stop with this attack until his opponent is like a puddle of flesh and bone. Spec is, in my opinion, the single strongest convict out of the 5 of them, but I don't think Dorian is that far behind. But for this video, the 5 of them will team up in order to taste defeat in the world of Dragon Ball. So let's move over to how far I think the 5 of them could make it in Dragon Ball. Now, let me start this off by saying that none of the Baki characters will ever make it outside of Dragon Ball, and if by some miracle they do, Raditz will curb some them with 2 fingers up his ass. But the battles these convicts would have in Dragon Ball would still be pretty epic. If you ask me, of course. one of, if not the biggest battle in terms of skill, would be the entire Red Ribbon army versus the convicts. And you might think that with all of their guns and cannons, the Red Ribbon army would win pretty easily, but Spec was tanking metal cannonballs with his nose, so I doubt their guns would do them any good. And besides, a gun wound is like a paper cut to a Baki character. Like, a couple of torn limbs and broken ribs here and there is just another Tuesday to these guys. The first real threat would be General Blue and the androids like Android 8 and Major Metallotron, who would provide some challenge, but if even 2 of the inmates team up, they will win these fights quite easily. General Blue can only paralyze one of them at a time, so the others will just have a field day giving him backshots, let's be completely honest there. Android 8 might do some damage, but the combined efforts of the convicts should be able to take him down rather effectively. The biggest threat the Red Ribbon army could potentially throw their way would be Mercenary Tau. But I am going to be completely honest with you guys here. I think these guys could defeat Tau, like no cap, no kidding either, like I just really think so. My reason for this is that Baki characters are stupidly durable, so they won't get one shot even by the likes of Tau. And there is also the fact that a grenade pretty much took Tau out, so I don't see an issue with Dorian and Spec absolutely ass-blasting him with bombs, fire and Spec's Apnea Rush. The real challenge begins with Demon King Piccolo. My personal take is that the convicts stand a chance against old Demon King Piccolo, but once he regains his youth, he will overpower them pretty easily. Even against his older self, the convicts would need to play things pretty perfectly or they could just lose just as easily. But once young Demon King Piccolo enters the scene, not even 50 Death Row convicts just like them could stand up to him. Not a single one of them can realistically tank a blast that can destroy entire cities, if you were to ask me, but I don't think my opinion should be word on that. I think it's pretty obvious. But we kind of knew this would happen anyway, since the Bakiverse and Dragon Ball verse are just so different in terms of power scaling, but you have to admit, seeing these guys dominate early Dragon Ball would be sick as hell. So in light of these things, I will personally place the Death Row convicts in the Demon King Piccolo saga on my tier list. And whilst making this video, I seem to have forgotten to place it in the Petelgeuse video, so say hi to Petelgeuse up there in the early Saiyan saga-ish tier. But yeah, what do you guys think? Did I do a proper job of trying to rank the Death Row inmates, or did I get this entire thing completely wrong? Do let me know your own takes in the comments down below. And with all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching today's video. As per usual, I truly do appreciate every single viewer that takes the time out of their day to watch my content. It makes me very happy to know that even a handful of people just enjoys the shit I make, because you know, it probably is pretty shitty. But if you actually by some miracle would like to see more of my content in the future, please consider clicking the subscribe button and turning on all notifications for my channel. And with that entire video out of the way, work hard, study well and eat and sleep plenty, and I will see you all again in the next video. Peace out.